Hey guys, hope you guys doing great. My computer's complaining. Hold on a second, but we're good. I think we're on. Let me double check. If you guys see in the chat if we're working or not, let us know. So I'll give like a few seconds to confirm that we're on. And once we are on, we'll keep going at it. And I think we are, but we'll wait for the chat. Let's see here. People giving thumbs up, so I'm assuming it's all good. My phone's saying that I think we're doing good. Oh, oh, oh. All right, so I'm here with Eric. He has an amazing channel, Eric Programming. You could check out some awesome tutorials that he has on there. And if you're trying to, 1 second, I'm like playing audio on my other phone. What a terrible, unprofessional start here. But if you're wondering why Eric has an avatar virtual face, is because he's not a YouTuber. He's a developer. He's a software engineer that has a job. That's what his most important thing is. So he wants to keep some sort of anonymity while he's helping out. So I want to thank you, Eric, for being here and showing up. So before we start, can you just give us a brief introduction of who you are, where you work, and briefly how you got started in software engineering, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you very much, Paul, for having me on this channel. Now, yeah, just a brief introduction about myself. My name is Eric, and currently, I started software development way back in 2018. So my that's where my journey of software developer began. And then, after a couple, university for a couple semesters, then in 2019, that's kind of like officially when I decided to go on this self-taught journey to learn about programming and anything out there about software development. And then in 2020, that's basically where I started my first job working at a startup as a software developer. And then, starting from there all the way to 2021, in November, I started to become a software engineer at Microsoft. Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. And how would you describe your journey? Because a lot of people, they're on YouTube and they see these pretty cool videos where it's like in 3 months you could get whatever the highest job is, make $1 bajillion. Like from your experience, what was the process learning? Was it as easy as people make it out to be? And how long did it take you?
I would say the learning is quite different compared to going to the 4 years of university or even a boot camp, because in a boot camp or university there is a program, there's a curriculum, but for self-taught, everything is like you have to research on your own. You have to do a lot of research, decide what path is right for you. So it is very challenging. It's kind of like you're building a business. There's no guidance at all. So it's kind of like that. Yeah, definitely is a lot challenging than those other options for sure.
And if you had to say from start to finish, how long did it take you of self-study?
Um, so basically, I start studying around 2019, and basically that was like the one semester I took one semester off, and then basically trying to do the self-taught route, going through some Udemy courses. So basically, I did about 3 or 4 month ish. And then I basically started applying to jobs. At first, it was really challenging. I don't have any software engineering experience. Got a lot of rejections, but I was able to not basically I was able to very motivated to go out there and find like a startup job, because startups, their requirements can be varied. And usually if you believe in the products, if you talk with the person who's responsible for the technology side of things, they know you, then that you can be able to get some experience from there. So I basically, that's what I did. I look for jobs from there's a website called angel.co, I think,
Yeah,
angel.co,
nice.
where you
Yep.
can find or apply jobs for startups. That's what I did.
And in your experience,
So that
from
process took about yeah, like I mentioned, like about 1 to 2 months for actually like applying and getting a first startup job for sure. Yeah.
And getting your first startup job, how was the interview process, in terms of like, what did they have you do? Was it, uh, uh, lead code type of questions heavy, or is that something that you had to do, let's say, for preparing for the current role that you're in right now?
Yeah, it's definitely different. For startup jobs, I apply to many. Every company has different variations of it, but I would say there are a couple of types. One type of startup jobs, they're usually just a more kind of system design kind of thing where they ask you kind of a bunch of questions about maybe your personal project or maybe a designing a, for example, Facebook or whatever, and you're basically just there to interview or whatever. And there's like another type of interview process where they give you like a personal, where they give you like a I guess like a requirement, and you have to implement that requirement basically using whatever tech stack that's I guess that's given or something like that. And the other part of it is sometimes what they do is they give you like a hacker rank question, and they
Yep.
also kind of do like some coding interview kind of questions, something like that. But those kind of coding interview questions tend to be more practical, more less related to things like DP or.
Yep. Yep. And so, no, that's good. Very interesting, because that's what I tell a lot of people. Keep applying and go to as many interviews as possible, because you're just not sure what process you're going to do. And before we jumped on the stream, I was kind of telling you how a lot of the interviews that I had where they were more algorithmic heavy, I didn't do as well. But a lot of the interviews where they asked me to build something that I was very comfortable and confident with doing, those are the interviews where I kind of shine, because I was able to deliver on the requirements that they did. So until you interview, you're not sure what it is. But with that being said, after, like, how long did you stay in your first job before you decided to move on?
So I stayed there for almost about a year, I would
Hmm.
say. But then after about a year or so, and then I just moved into a different company where the company is more larger, is more well established.
Yep.
And because I realized that you for startups you're only working with a limited amount of people, so it's really hard to get opinions from other people. It's really hard to I guess to grow. I think, like, yes, there's a lot of control working at a startup, but there's also a lot of, I guess, responsibilities, and there's also, I guess, lack of networking. I think you only always networking with like these 4 or 5 people or so, so it's really hard to know what is really looks like working at a uh, I guess like a big tech or production or like a big other software companies, I guess. Yeah.
So as a general advice, like people that are starting out, and let's say they're trying their best, going on LinkedIn, looking, talking to recruiters, trying to, apply to some of these bigger companies and having a hard time, would you say that their best bet and easier approach, at least for your first job, is using something like, Angel.co, and looking to get hired with the startup?
I think that's kind of like my last line defense, because at that time did apply to many companies, like through Indeed or through LinkedIn or networking with a lot of people, messaging or sending random connections on LinkedIn. That's what I did at the beginning. It is tough, but I feel like especially for me, like at that time, I think it is a bit difficult because I don't have any like relative experience. So
Yep.
I kind of like, rely on Andrew.co as like kind of like my last line of defense. But if
Yeah.
you feel like you could get jobs from or get offers from like Indeed or through in LinkedIn networking at first, then I think by all means go ahead. I think that will definitely works. But for me, I have to get experience because I don't know, if I keep self learning, if I keep self teaching, is going to end up anywhere. Like I want to feel that what I'm doing with my self-taught journey is actually working, is like on the right path. So that's why I kind of wanted to get some work experience, see what's out there, and be able to make some other decisions about where I want to learn for the next half year or a year from now or whatever. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And so when you first started learning to code, how did you choose what technologies to learn? And did you go like all in full stack, or did you start, front end first? Like, what was your experience like?
Yeah, so my experience when I started is basically learning React, basically learning JavaScript, because I basically done a lot of research. I realized that JavaScript is kind of more easier and more popular because the mostly they're like the web stuff, like the UI stuff, like the application side of things. JavaScript is kind of like the key there. So that's where I started using JavaScript, and then I started learning about React, and then I started to get to learn more about like things like database like Firebase, or NoSQL database, or things like that. And then learning about Node.js Express and stuff like that. And then I start to learn about design patterns, and I started learning about more on the backend side of things about SQL, and
Yep.
then start to pick up different language like C sharp, or static type language like Java or C sharp. So basically something like that. That's kind of like where I what I did when I start self teaching, and basically I want to go for the more full stack because it gives me a better idea about what is it like to develop application from the front to the back. So that took me about 3 to 4 month ish to learn about it and to build project with it, and learn how to work with the language overall. I think that's kind of like what I did.
So let me ask you a question. Like 3 to 4 months. I mean, everybody learns differently. For me, I knowing what I know now, I would feel like 3 to 4 months for me at least. That would be like a very extreme schedule that I would have to maintain to make enough progress to be able to feel confident enough, like applying to jobs. So, how was your studying? Like how was your schedule? What were you doing? And how did you choose what to learn in what order to make sure that you were kind of able to maintain that pace?
Yeah, that's a great question. I basically learned doing this full time. So like I mentioned, I take one semester off. So that's one semester is about 3 to 4 months.
Yeah.
So I basically started to learn everything that I could from like online resources. I know that there are YouTube channels out there that does this. At that time, Free Codecamp has like a lot of resources,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it
Great
wasn't
channel.
as big as now where there's so many contents out there. But before, I basically used Udemy because Udemy, at least there is a sense of direction. Like it's not like one tutorial, then the instructor just left you behind, or
Right.
just like like go doing completely somewhere else. They actually have like a full curriculum, like a course that can guide you from the start to the end. And if you have questions, there is like a teacher assistant, I think, in Udemy that help you to answer questions. So that's like what I did. I basically did this for like full time for like 3 to 4 months. So my schedule was like literally like from like 8 in the morning, and then all the way to uh, like 5 or 6, sometimes even 7 p.m. if there's like a crazy environment issue and I don't even know how to like
Oh man.
debug it or
Yeah.
some stuff. Yeah,
Oh god.
yeah, that's true. Like there's no teacher, there's no
No.
instructor, there's no
No.
professor helping you. It's just all you alone. Like that's why I said in the beginning, it's like, kind of like business. You're starting a business, you got
You
stuck, you
just
don't know
got
what
to
to
do what
do.
you got to do.
Yeah, you just Google stuff, right?
It's funny that you say it. Like sometimes I end at five, and then sometimes and it's kind of like I just keep going until I figure out this stupid thing that I'm trying to figure out, and it's kind of sometimes what you got to do. Like I remember, uh, being stuck on something and just refusing to go to sleep because of like I'm so close, I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna figure it out today. And a lot of times it's like, no, let's wait till tomorrow. And so that's what people have to understand. Like you need
Yeah,
to really go ahead.
I do want to say that it's really important to have like a clear purpose of where you want to study for this. I think like the planning phase is really important. Where you want to study, if you study this, what are you going to do after? I think that's like very important. Have like a purpose. It really drives the motivation. Like sometimes when you do self studying, it's really hard to keep you motivated. But if you have a clear purpose about this is what's going to happen if I learn this, if I stick to it for like 3 to 4 months or so, then it is really effective. I won't even go further than a 3 to 4 month, because sometimes you're always learning, but there's not much things that you can be able to apply. That's not really good either. So I always build learning things and be able to build projects, by using this stuff. That's kind of like how I take it.
Yeah, no, that's very important. And so one of the biggest things, like a lot of times when people start studying, they'll just like, I bought a billion courses. Like, I'm not even exaggerating, like literally a billion courses on Udemy. I probably could have bought a boot camp, like, you know, like, ride with the amount of money I spent on Udemy, which I definitely say people shouldn't. But there's that impulse of people just buying course after course after course after course. And after like 3 months, 4 months, 10 months, 2 years, they're like, I still don't know what I'm doing. So like, how many courses did you end up like purchasing? And your strategy was basically, I'm assuming, just literally do the course that you did, and a lot of assumption here, understand the material, be able to build something with it yourself, before even entertaining the idea that you need to buy like 30 more courses. Like, I'll be curious about like how many courses you took and what was your mindset in doing them. I know you touched on it a little bit, but can you give us a little bit more detail?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, basically, I just, to be honest, like in the early days of Udemy, because I was there, basically what happened was the return policy was pretty easy. So if you learn a course within 30 days, they will usually give you money back guaranteed. But what happened nowadays is that if you purchase a course 30 days and then you didn't finish, like you finish 50% or more, then you're not eligible for a refund or something like that.
Right.
I don't know, but I think this is what I happened like last year around like November or October-ish. But at that time, what happened was that there's like this 30 days money back guarantee. So I kind of just took that,
That's
motivates me
motivation.
to try to
That's
finish the course within 30 days. Within 30 days, that's kind of like my motivation. But the course is not really expensive. It's like only $12.
yeah,
But
yeah, but
it really motivates me to like finish it, get your money back, and then move on to the next stage. Um, it was, yeah, I don't know why I said this, but like, yeah, it is kind of like one of the motivation that I did. But so I didn't purchase any courses. So some courses that I purchased, maybe past the 30 days return policy, so I don't really care. But overall, I think I purchased a couple. If I don't feel like it was useful, then I'll definitely like refund it. But I usually look at the ratings, look at the reviews. I think that's like really important. But overall, I feel like Udemy is a really good, great platform. It's a lot of you can see that because a lot of instructors, they do maintain their courses.
yeah,
If they
it's
do,
amazing.
that you will
It's
see
amazing.
it on the course page. Yeah.
Yeah. And for like
Sometimes I
12.99.
feel like you'll see instructors are getting underpaid.
So where's that guy? CC Dodds, whatever his name is. He's like a big React guy. His React course is like $600. I was like one of those fools that bought it for $600. It's not a Udemy. He has his own like website, and I was like, it's can't see Dodds. It's gonna be the most amazing like React course ever took. And if he watches my live stream, I'm sorry, I love you, but damn, there are 12.99, like $12.99 courses that rival his $600 course on Udemy. And so quality of material on Udemy is very impressive. And here's the thing that I recommend to people. You literally only need, like speaking for front end, you only need one HTML course, one JavaScript, one React course, and one Node course. If you complete those 4 courses and you understand 80% of what you did, and then you build stuff yourself, you'll definitely, in my experience, knowing what I know now, will know enough to be able to start the process of getting hired. Like, you don't need 30 courses. So it's kind of like funny that you just bought a few courses, well, and then return them, but like, and you just stuck to it, work through them. And what I like, what you said and how you're doing things, like, I feel like you had a very intense desire to succeed and you were willing to do whatever it took. And that's why you were like, I don't mind like putting my life on hold for, you know, this 3 to 4 months duration and just doing what it took. And I know for some people it's very difficult to do, especially people that may have family, they may be working a job, maybe it's hard for them to take time off. So there is always that level of responsibility. And so what I was going to say, how was your family support, or like in terms like what allowed you to be able to dedicate like 4 months of your life to just do it fully? Because for some people it's very difficult to do.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, I kind of um, I think my parents are very supportive. They are. I think I basically what I said to them was like, hey, if this doesn't work, then I'll be back at school, right? That's kind of like
Yeah, yeah,
what I communicated, like, because I only, like I mentioned earlier, I only take this as like a trial. Like, hey, is this possible? Because I've seen people did it, and I think that this is possible. Let's try it. Because I talked to be honest, like there are in many universities and schools, they have advisors. I talked to a lot of schools that advisor about this, where people or professors, believe it or not, some computer science professors, they actually have some industry experience. So I talk to them because sometimes they tend to be more transparent. Some schools, they're just there for you to make to make money out of you. So it is really hard. But some teachers or professors, they're really good to give you some advice. So I basically thought about this. So I just give it a try for like 3 or 4 months. If it doesn't work, then I'll go back to school. That's kind of like what I told myself and my family. Yeah.
yeah. And so like you don't have to share how old you are, but like I'm assuming you talked about like you were going through your college, so people could guesstimate. And so what I would say, like I like from me being older, I would say the younger you are, the less responsibility you have. Something like this, like because somebody asked the question, what you're saying is that you took 4 months, to learn to code. And yes, that's kind of exactly what you're saying. But what I want to put a caveat to that, his supportive family, like, being where he was in life, like for Eric, this was a realistic approach to do. And he took full advantage of it by immersing himself full time study, 100%. Someone who's older, someone who might have a family, who might have a job, like this is why I say, more realistically, give yourself that timeline of a year to really, like 6 months to a year, if you want to be like, try to do it as fast as you can. Like, which I feel would be hard if you have all these other responsibilities. So please understand that everybody has their own journey, and you can't really say like if it took Eric 3 to 4 months doesn't mean that it's going to take you 3 to 4 months. I know it took me way longer than that, but it really depends on your commitment. So my next question would be, right, like you were learning to code from, and like I believe like sometimes I forget stuff, but you said like 3 to 4 months after you started learning, you started applying. And roughly how many uh, resumes have you sent out, or how many jobs applications did you do before getting that first job with that startup company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really liked how you asking a lot of detailed questions. That's really good.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, so basically, basically I apply to all the jobs that are out there every single day. Like I will basically spending like 2 hours. At that time, I was just like mostly studying a library. So basically, every 2 hours I'll take the time to apply to jobs on Indeed, on LinkedIn, share my resumes, and then also, it doesn't really matter if the pay is low or high. I
Right.
just apply, and then I send a lot of like connection to people. At that time, I didn't really know who I should send it to. I sent it to recruiters. I sent it to like some company CEO. Like I send it to send connection invites to people like senior or tech lead or even like IT like jobs that are not even related to, like I even sent a connection to a salesperson of that company, which is really really off track there. So I didn't really know how to network. So I basically again look some tutorials online and see how it works. So I basically start to fix myself, or I guess fix my resume, and how to be able to, I guess, put the projects that I built on my resume, even though I don't have any experience. I do have experience working as like a personal trainer or a customer service in the past, or something like that, or volunteer. I even put that on there just so that I have some work experience there. So and kind of like on the resume kind of specify that I do have some communication skill, that
Right.
I do have like maybe leadership skills or skills that are similar to a software developer. So or problem solving skill, those are really great as well. So I basically mentioned that on my resume. So I basically just try to make it more um, fit to the jobs that I apply, pretty much. Yeah.
And how many like job applications do you think you sent? It doesn't have to be exact number, but just in general, like, ballpark.
I yeah, I'm currently still thinking, but I think last time I saw it, I think it was like around definitely above 1,000. I can definitely say that about
This is
because think about it this way: 1 to 2 month, I spend 2 hours every single
yeah,
day.
yeah.
It was crazy. Yeah,
Here's the thing. This is like when people hear that number, their mind blows up. They don't comprehend it. So this is why I wanted to bring you on because like I only want to have like I don't want to talk to YouTubers who are YouTube talk. I want to talk to people who like similarly to what everybody who's watching this channel going through. They're going through the struggle. They're trying to apply, and I want to hear about real experience. So the what the number you talked about, like the resume, like I'm just still kind of like having my head like why people get surprised that after only sent like I have people connect to me and they're like, man, I sent out 10 applications and I can't get a job. I'm like, you never will. Like, everybody I talk to, especially like even people after boot camp, they're sending out like in 400, 500, 300, 200, 1,000, like that many resumes. And what a lot of like I hear, like basically this girl that I just talked to, she did a boot camp for QA. She sent out, 400 resumes, 400, got 8 interviews, 8. And out of those 8 interviews, I think she got like 2 to 3 job offers and then one that she took. So those are crazy numbers. And so what I say, it's like, don't be like, hey, I can't get a job. Just understand if you're not like 400, 500 resumes, like that's sometimes kind of what it takes. And like, don't get discouraged. Just understand it's part of the grind and part of the thing that you do. And so before we continue, I do want to encourage everybody to ask questions. And Brian had a great question, like in terms of kind of getting an idea, what did you do? That's not the wrong comment. Hold on a second. His question was, what are some of the first tasks you were given when you first got hired? And this would be like your first job working at that startup, just to give an idea of what people could expect. The one caveat, what I will tell you is when you work for a startup, you might wear many hats. So you could tell us if that was the case for you.
yeah, definitely. I was about to say that. Like, I think the first task that I was given, I think I was doing some testing, writing some end-to-end testing on the front end side of things, because I think writing some testings really gives you what this application is about. So I was basically that was like my first task assigned to me about writing end-to-end testing. At that time, I have no idea about Cypress or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I had to learn that. And then there's also, like you mentioned, like tasks that you have to wear many hats, where you are assigned with a task that are related to DevOps, and you never use DevOps before, or you never use services like CloudFormation or AWS services before. So you had to learn that. Sometimes you have to create design docs and for people to review. So stuff like that, for sure. I have to mention, startups, you have to wear many hats. And there's one time I have to, create a like a UX, like a component on the front end,
Yep.
because I'm a full stack developer. So I do some on the front end, some on the back
So on
end
the
side
back
of
end, yep.
things. So it is very different every single day, but I can feel that. You know, it's not much big of difference between the self-taught versus working, because in self-taught, if you get something wrong, you basically look it up online. But for working, you also still do the same thing. If you get something wrong, or if you have an issue, you have to learn this by yourself. Of course, there's like a senior or like a tech lead who can direct you, but more so, you still have to do a lot of research to problem solve And sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes you might have to go to maybe like a conference or like a video, I guess like a, I don't know, some I guess like a activities outside of work to learn more about. There was like a AWS reference or conference
Yeah.
happen every year, and then sometimes I attend there, stuff like that. Yeah, basically try to like learn more from
So
other
that's a
people.
like a great point. What you just mentioned from the case that sometimes I might ask you, like you were saying, you've never done end-to-end testing until that was an assignment for you at work. And I feel like if you're starting out, like especially as a junior role, they kind of understand that you might not know something, and they, understand that you will have to research and learn the topic like while you're at work. And I feel that's normal as well. And I used to feel guilty about studying at work and learning new things because I was like, oh man, should I have known this? And then it dawned on me is that some of the tasks that they're assigning you, especially if you're a junior and just starting out, they would never have those tasks assigned, like let's say to senior or even mid-level developers, because they're learning on solving like much higher level problems that, having them do something like, let's say, having you never done end-to-end testing, having you spend like a day looking through the docs and creating an example and then implementing it yourself is still gonna be cheaper for them than asking, like, let's say, like a senior guy to do that. Like that was at least my thought of thinking to justify why it was okay for me to study at work. So that was like it's great that you said that. Exactly like the example where it's like the same way you do self-study, where sometimes you don't know something, you have to look it up. It's like exactly the same thing at work, which I think is awesome example. Um, let's see. So
Yeah, I think in terms of how much study you have to do at work is, I would say, it's more there's more direction because there's like a particular problem you're trying to solve. Whereas like self studying, you're basically uh, think that this is what I have to learn to get the job. So you kind of like kind of learn blindlessly, what I would say. But when you're at work, you're kind of have
yeah,
like a direction. Like I have to learn this to solve a particular problem, and it is really, I would say, it is really practical. I would say definitely.
yeah, and like the feeling I had when I got my first job working as a React developer is that I felt like I learned more in my first 3 months working like at a company than I did like trying to learn on my own. So like the 4 months of self study versus 4 months of working. In your case, did you feel like you learned way faster while working in that same span of time?
Sorry, what was the question again?
So the
I
question
didn't get
was,
the last part.
yeah, no worries. So the question was, when you started working at your first company, did you feel that the first 4 month working that you learn more at a faster rate than you did when you were doing self study on your own at home?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think at least you know what is expected, what is required at work. So it really, I feel like, yes, there is kind of like a 2 week sprint or 1 week sprint where it actually kind of pushes you to learn something, to get things done, and you have to be like really good at what you're implementing. Otherwise, it'll be, pretty bad. That, hey, yes, this is what you have to do, but you don't really know, what are some pros and cons or stuff like that. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, like you have to create design docs to for other people to review. Sometimes people can be able to review that, and because this have to be implemented in their product, so they can give you some questions, some comments, some suggestions, and you kind of learn a lot as well from other people's comment, for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. Awesome. And I did have a, what do they call it, super chat from Idrissa. I wish you put a comment so we could shout you out, but thank you so much. And also, I just want to quickly look at some question. Abi has said he has invested John Smigla courses on Udemy. Is that enough? And for me, like here's the one thing when it comes to courses. If like this is coming from someone who has over like 1,000 courses on Udemy, not over exaggerating here, that after you do like, you know, 10 courses, let's say you have React, JavaScript, you know, HTML, CSS, and Node, you'll notice that all the other courses, they're basically teaching the same thing. Maybe like slight different angle, but the curriculum is the same. It's like taking math level 1 like 10 times. No, you just have to, like, it's one is enough. And so what I would say, instead of thinking about kind of how many courses you should take on Udemy, just get 4 courses: HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, and Node. And then if you understand 80%, and then just focus on building, there'll be enough for you to be able to learn enough, build better portfolios, knowing that you could code yourself. And I talk a lot about it. So I'm not going to go too crazy here. So that's enough. And it's like the same case in Eric's case. He just really dedicated to the few courses he took and make sure he was able to do it. And I know you went full stack. And, you know, Edward is saying here, I'm planning to focus only on front end until I get my first job. I believe I need to learn some API, even front end. How can you learn API without learning back end? So Edward, great question. So there's a couple of things, and I'll let Eric also talk about this in a second. But the best thing you could do, there's a lot of publicly available API. One example, like, you know, I was going to say there's that pandemic that was happening. They have an API for that. You know, some people do like, you know, Star Wars API. So there's all this stuff available that you could use and connect to. But what I would consider, if you want to make something that's kind of more filled out, but don't want to work on a back end, there's plenty CMSs available. They're JavaScript based, which will also be a good entry point in eventually learning Node. The one that I like the best is Strappy, which within 5 minutes, you could literally set up an API and then build your front end against it. So that's kind of cool. But my question to you, Eric, even though you chose to do full stack, do you feel that front end is an easier way to get your foot in the door, and from the perspective of the amount of stuff that you have to learn and also the type of interview process that you may go through?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I think you mentioned earlier that taking HTML course, JavaScript course, React course, Node.js course, I do have to say I agree with you there. But after you mentioned like building some projects, I think that's great. But also, one thing that I want to quickly add into is be able to look at how other people building a project, because I was there in before that. I was just learning some stuff, try to build a project on my own, but I realized that there's some crazy mistakes that I made along the way. That
Right.
I realized that, you know, there's nothing that, you know, you can do, because like online there's there to help you to solve a particular problem. But what about the design patterns? What about scalability? What about things like building application that's more similar to a production application? So
Right.
I realized that I made that mistake. So I basically, what happened in 2020, I kind of just rebuilt. So I have my work job, but I also on the side, I also build a job that's more similar to a production application that
Yeah.
uses design patterns, best practices, focus on scalability and all that kind of things. So that's kind of like something that I want to add on to it. But back to your question, I think for front end, definitely is the easiest way to get into the door. I can say that because I work both on the front end and the back end side of things, and I know that for front end, because you everything's more visual, because you're building a product, you can actually have a lot of control, and you can actually get a lot of accomplishment, especially if you work on the front end. Because versus on the back end, you have to worry about a lot about design, about maybe writing a specs, or maybe writing a design doc, or talk to a lot of people, or maybe worry about the scalability issue, or maybe worry about the on call, or a lot of things that you have to worry about. Of course, front end, you have to worry about that, of course, but I feel like for front end developers, there is a lot of accomplishments that you can, I guess, that you can achieve, because you know you build this whole thing and it's so visual that, you know, let's say you're in like a meeting or something, it's a lot easier to bring it up, right? Let's say if you are by the end of the year, you want to, you know, talk to your manager about like getting promoted or something. Hey, I built this feature, I built that feature. It's so visual that everybody can see. that, hey, you're making an impact,
Right.
that you are making an impact to focus on customer or whatever, or customer obsession. That's what, like one of the uh, principle that Amazon has on for their 14 leadership principle. I think 16 now, but yeah, it's basically I guess uh, I guess more achievements, I guess that I have to say for front end. So it's definitely easier to get a job, get into this front end field. I think it is hiring a lot, but also I think it's there's a lot more accomplishments that you can make as a front end developer for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's easier to showcase in your portfolio. And I guess like in versus backend. So going from your experience, where because the next question is actually from this dude Jettison. He says, "What about data structures and algorithms, and are they strictly required on all, or I'm assuming job interviews?" And what I would say, and before I give this question to you, is that on front end, as a front end developer, there are a lot more places where they ask you to build something versus like grilling you, on all the difficult Leetcode questions. I will bring it back to that in just a second. And so where backend, because it's not visual in nature, I feel like there's going to be more questions related to data structures and more questions related to more, difficult problems to solve. So in your experience, Eric, was that the case where, for backend, you would be asked more, algorithmic questions and more difficult questions than, let's say, someone who's doing just front end?
Yeah, I 100% agree there. I think in terms of job finding, I think there are different types of development jobs. So one is mostly on the backend engineer. So that's the title, backend software engineer. The other one is full stack. Now, the thing about full stack is that it can vary. Sometimes it can be very where full stack engineer, 80% of it is more on the front end, 20% more on the back end, or it could be the opposite, where 80% or maybe some big part is on the back end, and then little part on the front end. And then the other type of developer is just entirely front end developer. So I definitely think that for front end developer, it is easier because they don't really test you too much on the data structure, unless you're applying for companies like big tech companies. Then you're
Right.
automatically
Yeah, like any thanks and what
that,
have you.
they're going to test you about system
Regardless,
design or maybe
regardless, yeah.
data structures and all that kind of stuff. But I assume that the question that it will give you is less harder compared to those backend
Right.
engineers, because basically I tried to apply for other companies in the past, for the big tech companies, and I realized that if it's more on the front end side of things, they do ask you less system design kind of question about database, about all that kind of things. They tend to ask you more about some practical stuff that you're going to use day to day, stuff like that. And they might ask you some type of question about like GraphQL or React Native or
Right.
Chromium, or some Webpack technology stuff. Even in the big tech, they might ask you some question like that to see if you have that part of knowledge. And yeah, so it is really more practical side of things rather than the data structure side of things, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And by the way, if you guys haven't smashed the like button, I guess that's what everybody says on YouTube. Smash the like button for Eric giving us the time, sharing some like valuable information that could help you get hired or move in the next position, and for all the people in the comments, and keep asking those questions. So Jettison here getting advice, and everybody who follows this channel kind of know where I stand with this, but he says for anyone that just wants to go front end, just consume API, basically fetch the API data from this and display it on the front end. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, because my experience has been when people say like front end developer, what they're actually saying, understand front end like 70%, but be familiar with all the basic back end concepts like 30%. Like you can't just be strictly front end. When I think of like people strictly front end, they're web designers. You have the web developer, that you have your like web designer, UX UI design, which is a little bit different. But from my experience, like I felt like if I didn't understand at least like full CRUD functionality, what that means, how it works by hitting an API endpoint, how the API was getting the data and how I was able to consume it, and also understanding like basics of like user authentication, what a JW token is. Like if you're kind of Jettison summing that up into that statement, I would be like, yeah, that is the case. But if just like getting data and showing it on the front end, like just displaying it, not CRUD, not authentication, all the stuff, I think that's not enough. Like, what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, that's definitely not. I definitely agree with you there. And a couple of things that I want to add is learn about cloud services. I think that's something that it is very hard to ignore. Things like, for example, AWS Amplify, or things like AppSync, or GraphQL, or things like you mentioned, JDP token, or maybe different ways to authenticate things like Auth0, right? There's also many other ways other than GraphQL. For example, there's like a thing called gRPC, and there's also many other ways to communicate from the front end to the back end. So I think there's a lot more to it. Just learning about back end. So I think yes, definitely look at the I guess look at the job requirements and see, what are some other combinations come with other than just the front end, like React TypeScript or React
Yeah.
JavaScript, Angular or whatever. So definitely.
And just because you kind of quickly mentioned a bunch of like technologies, I forgot to ask you this. A lot of people want to learn everything at once, and I want to learn JavaScript, I want to learn Python, C, Sharp, like React together, Angular, whatever. Do you feel like people, like especially when they're starting out, they should really narrow down their focus when learning? So if they, let's say, start learning JavaScript and React, just really focus to a point where they understand that well before moving on, or like what would you suggest in that case?
Um, yeah, definitely focus on learning couple particular technologies. For me, at that time, I kind of learned React, but I also had some curiosity with other frameworks. So I also learned like Angular. I
Yep.
didn't really learn Vue because it wasn't really that popular. But yeah, I learned a lot about React. For example, learning about Redux.
Yep.
I use Redux for building with a project. I even use a different library called Mobex, which is another state
Yep.
management, just
Yep.
to get a feeling about what does it looks like and all that. And then try to focus on the front end, different aspect of front end, like you mentioned, like the CSS part, and using different libraries like Material UI or
Yep.
yeah, stuff like that. Or also learning about like unit testing. I think that's something that I kind of forgot to learn at
I
first, because
think
I
a lot of
thought like,
people, yeah,
yes, it's pretty
don't do
easy.
it.
It's like, yeah, I should have picked up something like Jest or Cypress, stuff like that, to at least like get some experience. But
So
of course, I also learned stuff like TypeScript, other things like that. Yeah.
yeah, so I had a couple of points to come back, but talking about testing quickly. So what I tell people, a general advice, like if you don't know like the basics of the language, let's say I'll use JavaScript as an example, you haven't like built at least one or two projects for your portfolio, like like then it's like I get it, like you skip testing, uh, but eventually, like for me, what I found out, like when you get hired, if they say like, well, we want you to write some tests, and if you say, well, I haven't done it, like they'll be okay with you looking at the documentation and learning. And I guess, like from my experience, because I suck at testing, obviously I'm better at it now, but I learned if you understand how JavaScript works and selecting elements, and you go through like Jest documentation, even Cypress documentation, it's gonna make a lot more sense to you. But if you don't understand like how JavaScript works in that sense, then testing would be like hard to learn. So the reason I say this is like, oh, damn it, I forgot to learn testing. If you understand, like say JavaScript, in cases of like Jest and Cypress and doing all the different tests, if you go through the documentation, you'll be able to surprisingly pick it up fairly quickly. You might not master it, but you'll know enough to start writing tests, for sure. And the other thing that you touched on, where you said it's, when you were adding to advice, like people learning proper patterns and coding and best practices. And something that you mentioned that stood out is that you were already working at a company and then you decided to go back and refactor like some of the projects that you did. And that's the point kind of I wanted to make, is that a lot of times as a self-taught developer, you just don't know what those things are until you get your foot in the door and you kind of see that guidance of like senior developers. And then also to your point, like I just forgot to mention, to reiterate, you said to make sure you're looking at other people's core code base, and that could be like at work. But what's awesome, there's so many great open source projects, and that's one of the reasons I like Strapi a lot, because like you could literally look at their code base and see exactly how they structure the application. So if you're learning backend and you want to learn how to build a CMS, you could literally fork their code and go through it line by line until you understand it. And then if you have a question, you could be like, well, why did they do that? And then you start learning about different patterns and stuff like that. So I think it's definitely useful to be able to look at other people's examples. So let's kind of move a little bit forward.
Not only
Go ahead.
useful, I think it also can be able to replace with the personal projects, because sometimes, yes, personal projects are great, but it's really not maintainable. Like you build it once and then you just kind of like forgot it and put it there. But
Yep.
sometimes if you have a GitHub account and then you just start to contribute more, start to review pull requests, and be able to put that on your resume and be able to show that, hey, I know how to review code. This is the stuff that I wrote. I basically was able to add blah 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 features, because in a real world company, they will expect you to work with the team and be
And
able
contribute.
to
Yep.
communicate with other people, work with other people, or work with other people's code to build features. So I think having that experience is even better than creating like a personal project, I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like, yeah, anytime you're able to contribute, I didn't think about it like early on in my journey, but it definitely makes sense because not only are you doing something in terms of like showing your programming experience, you're actually contributing to real projects rather than your personal projects. And like, kind of like, I'm not saying you guys should do this personally, but I remember a long time ago talking to some PHP developers, and they were literally just focusing on building plugins for WordPress and putting that on their resume and being like, hey, I built this plugin that's being used in WordPress by this many users. And at the time, it was like, whatever. And now I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. And so that's another thing you could do: contribute to code, contribute to plugin development. If you guys like JavaScript, by the way, I'm just going to mention it because I love Strapi more than anything in the world. Strapi has a plugin marketplace, and you could actually, if you want to dive more into Node, you could develop plugins for Strapi and then use that as your portfolio project. But what I want to do a quick pivot before getting to some questions. When did you decide that doing Leetcode and dedicating a lot of time towards it and really understanding algorithms was important? And like, what was your thinking behind it?
So the reason why I started to look into algorithm data structure was kind of because I wanted to focus more on um, the big tech. I think that at that time I really wanted to work at big tech companies, because you, like I mentioned earlier, that working at a startup, you only limited to these amount of people, and working at a big tech companies, you kind of get that network. You can be able to learn from a lot of people, and also good compensation, all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of like my goal. I don't learn things if it just like look good or something. I just learn things if I need it. So because I
Yeah.
know that this is something that I need to step into this big tech company zone. So I have to learn about algorithm structures, about best practices, about this design patterns, system design kind of stuff. So I kind of have to prepare myself for those things as well. So yeah, so that's kind of like the goal that I had, and I wanted to aim for learning about data structures and then algorithms, and then start to apply them using Leetcode. So that's kind of like why I do that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So this brings on an excellent question because of something you mentioned, going for the fangs of the world and applying to those companies. That's one of the reasons. So an honest, you know, kind of opinion, unless you're applying to FANG companies, should you dedicate like a majority of your time, let's say doing Leetcode, if there's still other more important things that you could do, like building out your portfolio, like networking with people to get hired? Like, what would you say, I guess, would be your kind of percentage of time allocated to someone who's, let's say, not going to a FANG company? If that question even makes sense, let me know.
Oh, sorry, say one more time about the question.
I said, you know, so here, how much value do you put on Leetcode if someone is just applying, to like regular companies versus applying to FANG? Like, would you say someone could totally get away not doing any of the algorithmic stuff and get hired um, outside of applying to FANG?
Yeah, I see what you mean. So I think to apply for jobs not related to big tech, I think it might still work. I would say I think it definitely works, but sometimes they still might send you some hacker rank challenges,
Right.
which kind of similar to LeetCode. So I think all you need to know really is to know how to use a hash map or hash set. I think that kind of it, because all I see, because I receive a lot of hacker rank challenges in the past, and
Yep.
all I see was just some questions that are related to: do you know how to use hash map? Do you know how to use object array and string, those kind of things? I don't really receive any hard DP kind of questions.
Yep.
Maybe that's because I didn't really apply to many front end jobs. I mostly apply for full stack or more towards the back end at that time. So I kind of didn't really receive too much hard questions for the front end particular roles. It was more like even crazier. Sometimes I even receive a question related to DOM manipulation, which is
Right.
test your basic knowledge about JavaScript and interacting with the web. So sometimes I don't think data structure algorithms can be that important if you're applying for front end. Yeah.
And I guess what I would say, like the things that you just described, those are basically like working with objects, working on arrays, working with strings, and being able to manipulate them in like, the most common basic ways that you should know because you know the language, because you're not dealing with like more complex, algorithms, like graphs or whatever. So that totally makes sense. And so my like stance on this is that if you don't know how to code, learn how to code. If you don't have at least 1 to 2 projects in your portfolio to showcase to possible places that you're applying to that you know how to code something, well, then you need to do that next. But once you have a portfolio that you're happy with and you're starting to apply and interview, I feel that would be the right time to start diving into some of these like algorithmic and data structure questions so you could have the basic idea. And I guess what I would do, and I think HackerRank has the percentage of what questions are most likely to be asked. And if you take the top few that are the most common questions asked and just spend some time on that, I think you'll be definitely good to go for a majority of the companies. And by the way, if you guys want to see some excellent explanations of Leetcode, big O notation, CS fundamentals, algorithm data structures, check out Eric's channel. I'm going to put it here in the chat, you guys. Really excellent stuff. So, he talks about, it looks like you talk about pretty much everything, like, which is pretty awesome. So, tell me about your strategy, like approaching Leetcode. How did you study? And how did you prepare for it, and then how did you tackle certain problems?
Yeah, for sure. So I at first so basically I start studying LeetCode back in the end of 2020. Just to carry on the timeline, basically what happened was I start to look at first of all, I basically use the Udemy course to learn about the algorithm data structure first. And then after that, I just start to look at legal kind of questions. I basically at that time doing blentlessly, like basically doing all the easy questions or whatever. But I realized that it's not really effective. So I start to categorize my learning, based on the topic. So for example, I at this week I start to only learn about two pointers. So I will only doing questions that are related to two pointers, ranked from the most popular to the least popular, right? So I start to do the most popular questions first because I know that I can be able to learn a lot from the most popular questions because it's getting frequently asked. Sometimes those popular questions testing many topics. Maybe one topic about array, or maybe one topic about do you know how to use hash map, and then there's a lot of things that goes into it. So I basically study week by week. One every week I'm on like a one topic or thing, or a thing or two. So basically I start to do that kind of more in the breadth first way, more uh, where I'm not going too deep on each kind of type of question. I start to cover as much topic as possible. So two pointers like sorting, binary search, stuff like that, all the way to DP, all the way to like graph or like breadth first search, depth first search, binary tree, all those kind of things. Start to cover all the topics that I can cover, pretty much.
Nice. And like listening to you, like it really sounds that you have a very structured approach to learning. And is that something, like obviously that's important to do, but I guess like like I don't know how I would ask it, but where did you learn how to learn, if that makes sense? Like, and if you have some strategies how people should be structuring their learning. I know it's like a very vague question, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I on my channel I have like this video called like my Leetcode roadmap, where I basically start with like a easiest topic, which is two pointer. Two pointer is probably the easiest Leetcode type of topic that you can pick. Is really just about how are you able to use variables to iterate something, kind of stuff like that.
Yep.
And it's still really important. And if you look at algorithm like binary search, it was kind of built on top of two pointers. So I basically did that, starting with the most easiest topic on Leetcode, and then I start to work on things like linked list. Linked list, I find that to be a lot easier compared to binary tree and all that kind of things. So to answer your question, like how did I start? How do I know how to learn this? I can only do that if I start to do some questions and realize that there's a pattern on how to do things. Like at first, you won't be able to do those kind of questions unless you know how to do the pattern. So at first, look at the answer. Just trust me. Look at the answer about the question. Look at my explanation. I sometimes tell you like why this is a certain way. So I really cover from a beginner level kind of thing. So because I don't understand those questions, so that's why I learn them and I make a video in a point of view where a beginner could have understand. So I kind of did it in that way. I started to look at the answers, understand why they coded that way, and I recognize the pattern. Then I do a question that are related to that kind of question. So I kind of be able to learn from it, so that if I take another question that are similar to this topic, then I can be able to solve it. So that's kind of like my approach to study Leetcode.
Yeah, I was actually just looking at some of your playlists. You have a quite a library on your channel. So guys, if you're looking to get some great additional resources, Eric's got it. And why did you choose Java particularly to do your lead code questions?
That's a great question. There's a couple of reasons. I was hoping someone could ask me this one, but basically the main reason is Java has a lot more, I guess, a lot more popularities on LeetCode. Let's say if you're looking for a solution on a particular question, and if you choose something language like C Sharp or something like Go or something that is not really popular,
Or you
not,
hate
not
yourself
popular,
when you
so
do
you won't get like a
JavaScript?
solution.
Yeah. What I know.
But sometimes one downfall about JavaScript is that there's no priority queue. Like you have to implement
Yeah,
it
you got to
using a
implement a
class
lot
or
of this.
whatever. But for Java,
Yeah.
there is a built-in library for priority queue. So there's a lot of convenience there, and you have to use a language that an interviewer can be able to understand. I definitely say that JavaScript and Java, those are the two my go-to language for code interview, because sometimes if this run out of time, I would just use JavaScript because everybody can understand JavaScript, right?
Yeah,
If
yeah,
it's a full stack role, everybody can understand JavaScript.
right,
But if
right.
it's I still have time. The question involves me to use like heap, min heap, max heap, or priority queue, or sorting, or dealing with other things, maybe that requires me to use type safety. Then I will definitely use a static language that's like Java or TypeScript, something like that. But TypeScript doesn't have like priority queue, so I still recommend using Java somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because I, know like certain things JavaScript just doesn't have unless you implement it yourself. But what I heard that for most interviews that you go to, they will, a lot of times will let you answer a question in the language that you're comfortable with. Have you had interviews where they were just very particular about the language that you should use to answer, or was it always like up to you?
Yeah, I think as long as you pick a language that can compile. Sometimes I know that for Amazon, they just give you like a kind of like a text pad and you just code it there. They're not really expecting you to compile the code at the end. But some interviews, I would say most interviews that I encounter, they really expect you to compile the code and make sure that the code works. So at
Mm,
that case, I really suggest using JavaScript because it's quick, it's fast. You don't have to like build those all those kind of test cases. So it's really convenience there. So for Java, yeah, like to answer your question, there's no specific language that they prefer you to use, as long as they understand what you're typing and be able to communicate your thought process to the interviewer. I think that's like the most important part of it. But sometimes they really don't understand the language that you are coding at. Sometimes they're using Scala, but you're using
oh my
Java.
goodness.
So you might have to explain a built-in libraries to them, like, hey, why you're using this function. Maybe there's like a particular function like arrays.binary search or collection.binary search, and they don't know what that is, and you have to explain them to. So yeah. Sometimes it could be time taking, especially there's only like 1 hour for each round of interview. So yeah.
Yeah, no. One thing I learned, which is like I learned after making this mistake, and maybe you could speak a little bit about this. A lot of times when they give you a time limit to solve something, it's don't try to find the perfect solution. Just try to get it to work first, and then maybe refactor afterwards if you have time. Because I remember trying to do something perfect from the start that I ran out of time. So, what recommendations you would give, in that regard, when you're doing, you know, the interview?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I know that this is like one of the popular questions, so I actually made this video on my YouTube channel called Five Steps to Solve Coding
Nice.
Interview Question. So I basically share a lot of tips, a lot of thought on that. And to answer your question, I think one of the thing I have to say is yes, focus on the higher level implementation. Maybe for example, you're trying to there are legal questions that are very time taking where you have to code maybe like 200 lines of code or whatever. And what you have to do is you have to focus on a bit more about the higher level architecture. For example, like, okay, this function does this function does that. And for my main function, this is how I'm going to solve the problem. I'm going to call this function first. I'm going to call that function first. And this function is going to do this. This function is going to do that. So it's kind of like focus on the higher level solution rather than the detailed solution, because sometimes it is really hard to finish everything in that 45 or 1 hour interview round. So that's kind of like what I focus on mostly, just trying to list out these are the things that I have to do first, and then I'll implement them. It either could be in code or it could be in pseudocode or
Yeah,
comments or whatever. Yeah, as long as the interviewer understand,
that
then
you
it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Good tip. I actually just shared the video in our chat so you guys could check out. And yeah, definitely just go to Eric's channel. He has like so many videos. Like I can't even count that high how many videos he has, and all will help you definitely master Leetcode for sure. I'm actually going to start watching your videos more. I know like we all have barely enough time to do anything. And so, what I want to do now is talk about your journey getting hired at Microsoft. How did that happen? How was the interview process? And This is, and what were your expectations in that particular role? It's like a three-part question.
Yeah, so just to basically what I do at Microsoft is like I said, mentioned before, a full stack role. So mostly on the back end, I would say. So basically, my journey to get into big tech basically started, like I mentioned, the end of 2020. Just to carry on the timeline, basically, what happened? I started doing Leetcode, and then what happened was I started to move into another company called Clear Renewables, which is a mid-sized company. At that company, the interview process is very similar. It's more like one round of coding interview, and the other is like one round of like behavioral. So I got into that company, and then I started to learn a lot about, I guess, software development. But really, what I learned there is, on the side, I also do a lot of lead code and do a lot of networking. And I start to, network with a lot of recruiters and, and all that kind of things. At that time, I applied to many companies. I applied to Amazon, Microsoft, like all those big tech companies that you could think of. For example, Twitter, or, I applied to Capital One, to Yelp, and all that kind of companies. So I got offers from other companies as well. And yeah, some interview process is easier, like what we just discussed, like as long as you know array or hash map and everything is just very good. But some companies, they really requires you to really know about data structure and algorithms, especially some jobs they require more on the back end side of things. The questions sometimes can be harder sometimes. So the process, as usual, just like one online assessment, sometimes maybe a phone screen. Sometimes I find that a phone screen can be easier than the online assessment, because for the online assessment, sometimes there's like follow-up question. There's like a lot more harder questions. You have to make sure to compile. The code must be compiled, must pass all the test cases and all that. But for, like a phone screen, it's more easier because you're interacting with that person, and sometimes if you're stuck, that person can help you out, right? The interviewer can help you out, answer some of the give you some hints and all that kind of things. And it's an easier process. So if you're interviewing, definitely ask a recruiter for a phone screen. If not, then maybe you can ask the recruiter to wait for a bit until the interviewer is available to do the phone screen. So I highly push for phone screen over the online assessment. I will have to say that. And then after the online assessment and the phone screen, basically move on to the final virtual onsite, where you do 4 rounds, and then basically there is usually, depends on the level, right? If it's SDE1, sometimes more just coding, where they ask you a bunch of algorithm data structures, and then one round of behavioral. If it's like more SD2 or more senior level, they might ask you more on the system design kind of parts, or things like more on the behavioral side, more on the system design side. Depends on the level, right? If you're applying for SD2, I applied for SD2 one time and I got two coding round, one system design, one behavioral. But if you're applying for like senior level round, more like one coding round, two system design, sometimes just only like one behavioral round or something like that, or maybe two behavioral round and one system design and one coding round. So it can be vary sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely makes sense. And then once you got hired at Microsoft, what was like your expectation in your role there? Like what kind of tasks you got assigned based on your experience? What did you start working on?
Yeah, so it's more, like I mentioned, more on the back end side of things. So basically, it is a full stack role. There is a front end side of things, but more on the back end side of things. So it's more building features on the M365, my workspace. So there's a product under Microsoft Office 365 called uh, my workspace, also known as Viva Insight. So I kind of built a lot of features there, and yeah, mostly working on the backend side of things using like C sharp,
Yep.
uh, .NET framework, and AW not AWS, sorry, Azure, more on the durable function side of things. So yeah.
Yeah, and the reason I asked because like my first job, I got hired as a React developer, but they also because it was a small company, they expected you to jump into backend, and that's where I started learning C sharp. And so one of the things I was going to say, like from your previous jobs, I guess what I would say is that if you know the fundamentals of programming, picking up your second or third language is much easier. So, because you work at Microsoft, obviously using C sharp makes sense. But did you start learning C sharp before getting hired there, or did you start using C sharp when you started working at Microsoft?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got learned about C sharp before I got hired.
Nice.
I used that to build a couple of my personal projects before. So I in my personal projects, I even built using both React and Angular and C sharp for the application. So I was able to show that, but I don't think it's really that important. I think like you mentioned, as long as you know one particular language very well, it's really easy to transition from one language to another.
Yeah, no, definitely makes sense. So, personal question. I mean, what do you think about Blazor and like what do you think in terms of you know, people adapting to use Blazor? Do you think it's still in its infancy stages, or do you think people could start using it for production and building stuff? Or you're not allowed to answer that
Uh,
question because React is, pretty
I
awesome.
I personally I know what you mean, like Blazor using C sharp to replace the front end side of things. I think I never used Blazor in the past, so I can't say too much on that. But I do
Yep.
know that with my team, I also use React and TypeScript for the front end side of things. So I don't see too much of term Blazor going around in the documentation or internally. So I don't know too much about that, but I don't I think the majority popularity in the industry nowadays is definitely React or Vue.js or Angular, those frameworks for the front end side of things. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because a lot of people make that WebAssembly argument, how it's going to take over the net, but like I feel like you could implement it in JavaScript also. I'm sure there's going to be a library that's going to transpile things or whatever. So, but yeah, I thought it was kind of funny. But I tried Blazor for fun, and I think it's cool. Like I think like if you're a C sharp developer and you just don't want to do JavaScript for many reasons, people might feel that way. If you're a C sharp developer, you've been doing it 10 years and you want to build these cool applications, I think Blazor is really awesome. For me, it's the opposite. I love JavaScript and Node so much that for me, I'll just stick with React and stuff like that. But I was going to say one cool thing about um, like C sharp is that the ecosystem and their development, like using a visual, like, so nobody uses like Visual Studio proper. Everybody loves VS Code, right? But if you're doing C sharp development, like, I don't mind using Visual Studio with Windows because it's like the best like development experience, and you get so much done so quickly on the back end that it's pretty cool. And if you just build an API and then you have front end and you React, I feel there's nothing wrong with that, even though I still love Node.js a lot. But C sharp, I think it's a great language, definitely a good language. So what I want to do now, by the way, first is again mention your phenomenal YouTube channel, and if you guys haven't checked it out, definitely go. I put a link to actually the video you mentioned about the 5 steps when you're doing whiteboarding question stuff. And one thing I was going to say, there's a lot, my cat is like destroying stuff here. One thing I was going to say is that a lot of people who watch my channel, they're like, oh, I'll never be able to do this. The field that I was in before just, you know, it doesn't relate to what I want to learn. So I was just looking at like your experience. You went basically from a certified personal trainer, and within 3 years working at Microsoft as a software engineer. So what I would say, it's like it is possible. And like I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial art training prior to switching into development. And I think it's all about the motivation and you taking the time to do the things. And so let me kind of back up because, like, going from certified personal trainer and I'm just on your LinkedIn, by the way, and moving forward, like what actually sparked your, I should have asked this like as my first initial question, but what sparked your interest in doing software engineering?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, before I was a personal trainer before, for almost like I would say 1 to 2 years, I at that time I really wanted to build this cool application related to fitness, but I didn't really get a chance to. So really wanted to learn about tech and start to build applications. But then, then there goes like computer science major. I realized that, there's not too much practical stuff that I learned from school about building, cool like application that we see every single day. So I kind of just really wanted to build applications that are related to fitness at a very early stage. When I was a kid. Yeah. So, or not when I was a kid, I would say when I was like a personal trainer, I always wanted to build something that's even better, um, better platform. Like I think one of the personal project that I called was like a fine personal training boot camp or something like that, or fitness camp or fitness classes, I think. And at that application, it was more just about helping audience to find personal trainers, to find fitness boot camps and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I always had a passion to combine those two. But nowadays, I feel like more on the coding part of things, less on the fitness part of things for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because I called you not a YouTuber but more of a developer, and someone said, YouTube channel, lol. I thought you said he was not a YouTuber, and so like it's funny to me because like this is the way I look at it. If you'll know I'm a YouTuber, by the way, guys, when I'm every 5 minutes like trying to sell you a course or promote my new sponsor or show you drone footage or my car or what have you, and basically to me, a YouTuber is someone who makes money specifically from YouTube. The way I look at myself, and Eric could speak his own mind on this, I'm a developer who happens to share my story on YouTuber. My majority of income is made from me working as a software engineer, and that's what my main focus is, becoming better at development so I could continue to climb the ladder of my most amazing job that I have. So to me, I don't even think of YouTube as a business at the moment because that's not my main focus. And if I was a YouTuber, my main income would be from YouTube, and that would be the priority. And the reason why I say this, you could easily tell, is because, and before I say this, there's plenty of great YouTube channels, and you just have to watch the ones that fit. But there's a lot of channels that you watch, there's drama or whatever, like whatever. I don't want to go on this like long diatribe, but the point is there's plenty of tech YouTubers who just put out good content from the standpoint, hey, if you watch this video, you're gonna become a better developer. Like you look at all the Eric's videos, it's like everything something useful in terms of either answering a question, solving a problem. And those videos, to be honest, they're not exciting for the general public. And that's why like channels like me, channels like his, will have 5,000 subscribers, maybe 10, 20, 30, but we'll never go to like 500K unless if we started YouTube early on, because we're not making content for YouTube. And that's the difference between content for YouTube that the algorithm would like versus content that will answer a specific question for someone who's looking to get into development. And I always make the joke, that's why you don't see drone footage on my channel. And that's kind of like why I say it. By the way, maybe one day both Eric and I will sell our souls to YouTube by making bajillion dollars. It's just not the case right now, because at the end of the day, like, this is actually why I wanted Eric to come on, because I want to talk to developers first. I want to talk about stuff that will help you guys to have a clearer picture from the standpoint of people who prioritize their development career over YouTube. Because unless you guys want to be YouTubers, this content is what you guys need to see. And this is why I'm going to constantly make sure to do that. And by the way, Eric, you're welcome to come back like at any time. But for the last question, because I want to be mindful of your time, we are almost at 1 hour and a half. My last question would be, before we do our closing thoughts, if you were to do this again, what would you do differently?
Yeah, that's a very great question. I always um, thought about this I would say every other day or every single day. Like, what would I do differently? But the answer continuously to be nothing. I used to think that, hey, I hope that I learn, you know, this first before that. But you have to, get yourself out there to talk with people, to know what is out there in the industry before you settle down. Hey, this is the learning path that I take. So I kind of did exactly that, or maybe somewhere around that. To always, do a lot of research, talk to a lot of people. Like I earlier mentioned, like talk to some professors from university or some other people, or look at YouTube videos and all that kind of stuff, to learn if this path is like doable or not. So I did a lot of research. I feel like if I did a lot of research and explore all the options that are out there, I think there shouldn't be like a regrets or anything. But of
Right.
course, I think as we talked, I think one of the regret that I would say is probably should focus a bit more on reviewing or like contributing more on the open source code. I think that's like also very important rather than just building like one spending like 1 month or 2 months or more to building like a personal project. I think reviewing code, reviewing pull requests, I think that's something that you're going to do every single day in your job, and have that experience on early stage. I think that's even better. And yeah, you can also be able to learn a lot from reviewing other people's code. And be learning about why they're doing this certain ways, and it's even better. Like if you look at all the senior developers, in doesn't matter big tech or small tech companies or startups, they're most of the times they focus on is reviewing code and reviewing design documentation. So I didn't at that time. I heard a lot of people told me this suggestion. I don't think it was a big deal, but overall, I feel like it is kind of a uh, something to consider. I would say something to consider if you're planning on doing the self-taught route with all work experience. I think having the open source contribution, I think that really makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely a great suggestion. And for me, like I've been kind of like I would have done the same thing you just mentioned because I didn't. And I think it's because I was afraid that I didn't know enough to contribute to those projects. And I think that was kind of naive on my part to let me be my own decisive factor why I shouldn't do it. I should have just done it because you're right, like you would learn so much. And there's so many great open source projects out there. One of my favorite ones. Is Strappy. And the funny story about that, like I had this channel and I talk about Strappy like all the time, forever, how awesome it is, all my projects that I do where I want to focus on the front end and have an easy way to create a back end, I use Strappy. And interestingly enough, over time, I feel it paid off because I just got hired there a couple of weeks ago. So I now work for Strappy. So please don't feel that I'm a Strappy shill because now that I work there, because the reason I work there is because I talked about Strappy for past like 2-3 years that I've been on the YouTube. But the last thing I wanted to say, Eric, is actually, um, do you do you have any questions for me? Like, anything or what? Actually, forget that. Like, what is your next goal for your next 3 months? Like, what do you want to accomplish on your YouTube channel and work related? And then we'll end it here because I feel like I don't want to go. Again, like I said, I want to be mindful of your time, and so there. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think one thing that I want to add on to our previous topic that we just talked about is, yeah, like I think another thing to focus on is like how do you contribute to open source project.
Mm,
There's a lot of ways that you can do it. Like you mentioned, you can fork a repository, another way if you can do it is like on GitHub. There's like a bunch of issues or a bunch of tickets, a bunch of action items, and you can look through that. Usually, if you look at some repositories, they usually have like actions or like a ticket where people or maybe the owner they assign some tickets, and then what they do is, or maybe like a milestone or something, and then basically you can look into that. You can engage in that conversation. There's usually like comments on like the ticket and all that kind of things, and that can also be a one kind of contribution, right? Like you have to understand the code, the project, before you make like a really critical decision or critical
Right.
suggestion. So I think in terms of contribution, I think there's many ways. And if you look at some big tech companies, they also have like repositories as well. So um, if you can be able to contribute there, sometimes it can also give you a chance for interviewing with the big tech companies or something like that, because you already know the
Right.
repository that you're going to work on. So it's a win-win situation, I think. Yeah. And then to say what are some goals that I have for my this year, or maybe like the next 6 months or so. I would say look out for my other channel, Eric Tech, because on that channel, it's more on the software development, system design, plus stuff that are related to career growth kind of thing. So at that channel, I interview a lot of people. I usually don't show my face, but at that channel, I usually interview a bunch of people like work at other type of companies, or for example, DevOps engineer, game developers, or product managers, solution architect, stuff like that. Like interviewing different career path in tech. It doesn't have to be software development. Yes, software developer can get paid a lot, but there's also a lot of other roles that get paid a lot as well, right? Like there for product managers, you also get paid a lot as well. For DevOps or site reliabilities engineer, you also get paid a lot, right? Responsibility different, but you get similar compensation as a software engineer. They always have like a level and all that kind of stuff. And you can be a game developer, right? If you love the visual stuff so much, you can also be a game developer. Considering, and I'm open to interview other people and try to learn more, as well as also try to focus on doing some software development like tutorials and stuff in the future. So yeah, something like that. Plus the system design kind of part. I feel like system design is really objective. It's really hard to define what is the right answer. Sometimes if you go to an interview, it's really open ended. But I know that if you understand how to build an application that's scalable, that's focus on the best practices, using the best framework or whatever. If you look at stuff like that, I think you can learn a whole lot from a lot of documentations, or there's like an AWS white paper, or AWS like references documentation, or even Azure documentation has that as well. You can learn a lot. Like the most videos that I made on Eric Tech, I just basically learned it from like Microsoft documentation or whatever. So that's basically what I did. I want to continue to do that. That's kind of like my goal for the future, for this year, or maybe for the next 6 months or so. So definitely this is something that I'm currently doing. Yeah.
Someone was like, obviously, it's only a matter of time. Why you're showing your artificial avatar. What I wanted to say to that, not everybody is a attention seeking person like myself that needs to constantly be out there. Some people want some anonymity, so like it's totally fine. Because one of the things like on YouTube, and I think like for me, like I'm gonna realize there was a mistake, is that I was really open with who I am, what I do, and how I switched careers and stuff like that. Because at the time I felt like I wanted to be open with my viewers, but obviously as the channel grows, having all that personal information out there definitely will bite you in the butt at some point, and that's something you got to deal with. So I totally like if I were to do my YouTube channel again, I'll probably do the same thing where I would just do more of these educational videos without using my face too. But at the time, I didn't think that far ahead. But it's fine. It's fine. So far, I've been very lucky. No one has been emailing me to my or calling my phone number, because I remember I showed how to write a resume, and then I totally didn't block out my real number. So it was in the video. I was like, I'm gonna whatever get some phone calls. It's okay. I don't answer my phone anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah. There are a lot of successful YouTube channels like Fireship or Neecode.
Oh,
They don't
amazing.
really
Yeah.
show their face. Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
show their face. They or I mean Fireship. There's probably one time he showed his face, but Rarely. So I think there are a lot of successful channels that are out
One hundred
there. You
percent.
don't
One
need to show
hundred
your face.
percent.
You really need to show the content, the knowledge that you're
Yeah.
trying to share. That's pretty much about it. Unless you're making like a drama video that you mentioned, or like prank videos, or news, or maybe interviewing other people on the street or
Yeah.
whatever. That probably
Yeah.
requires you to show your face. But I don't think too much on the tech side of
Yeah,
things.
no, 100%, 100%. And I think like as long as like you said, the content is good with your contents, by the way, is amazing. This is one thing like that frustrates me about YouTube is that there's so many smaller channels that have like the most amazing content, but because we're not kind of catering to the YouTube algorithm of making videos a certain way where it's just a lot of nothing but excitement, that it doesn't pick it up because ultimately they want you to watch stuff like entertainment because they want to put advertisements on it. So that's kind of sad to me, but at the same time, I'm still glad that we have a platform, even if it's on a smaller reach, to actually, reach the people that actually need the help and not talk about drama, not talk about the crazy nonsense, and actually give people helpful advice how to break into the field. Because at the end of the day, regardless where you are, how you start, it's still a challenging journey. And it's something that you will do for the rest of your life because in this field, you're dead as soon as you stop learning. You will, like, if someone says to me, I hate studying, I hate learning new things, I would tell them, like, this field is not for you at all because it's just constant studying. Like, actually, before last question, I promise, Eric, like, how much time do you spend, like, learning new things?
Can be vary sometimes, but mostly when I learn things if I need it. I think back to what you just mentioned, like yes, expect to learn, constant learning. That's true, but like I mentioned earlier, have a purpose about why you're learning. Because sometimes I even talk to other, because I work at big tech companies, so sometimes I like talk to other people, I network with other people. I even talked to another staff engineer, work at LinkedIn, I think, and he mentioned that he did like a bunch of tutorial videos on his channel. But the thing is that he don't really want to do it that way, where he just constantly learning about what's the latest technology, but rather, learn about something that's that is important, that you're actually going to build something, that you're actually going to solve a problem. Because
Yeah,
sometimes what happens is that he make those tutorial videos, and then when the time he need it, he has to watch back his tutorial video again. So it's not really wise. And sometimes, that's technology changing. Sometimes it might get outdated or whatever.
yeah,
Tutorials get outdated. I even had the oldest video that I made on Eric programming, I think was like some Angular video, and I think some packages was outdated. Some people commented on my video, and there's just really nothing that I can do about it, to
yeah,
be honest.
yeah,
So it's really hard. So I want to make video to achieve some goals, to solve a particular problem. If I need it for work, yeah, then I'll like learn this, I'll learn that, and then try to solve a problem with it. I think that way of learning is even better. I think
right.
because you have a purpose for why you learn things. So
Yeah, one,
in terms of like how long it take me to learn things, I don't really try to, let's say if I'm learning, for example, Nest.js, I won't really look at the entire documentation from the start to the end. I will just look at the things that I'm trying to build. So if I'm trying to build, for example, I want to do a server-side authentication, or like using Nest.js to do like authentication to make sure that the user's authenticated or something, then I'll just Google it and I'll try to look at the documentation on that page particularly, right? So stuff like that. But of course, there's like other things where it's like design patterns or system design. Then you might have to look at the entire page or the entire
right.
the lesson or whatever, to really understand, to really observe why this person designed this part of the system that way or whatever. So yeah, it depends, I would say, for the learning, the time frame.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And so I keep saying final last question, like for the final 10th billionth time. But just like I asked one question here that we did touch. Maybe he came a little bit late on the stream, but I just want to kind of bring it up as the final one. He said, to be fair, would he recommend learning and practicing with Java for coding interviews at big companies, or is it unimportant? And I know the fact was mentioned, you have to implement things yourself in JS. And so before Eric answers this question, actually all his Leetcode solutions from like his massive playlist is all implemented in Java. But just to clarify that real quickly before we go.
Yeah, I don't think you have to use Java for anything. I think mostly on the legal question that I did, I more focus on the solution, like the whiteboarding parts. The whiteboarding part is mostly just like visualizations. I don't really write code or anything, and I put the code in the like last couple minutes just to show you how it works. But it doesn't. I don't think you have to learn Java to understand my code. I think it's really like I mentioned earlier, if you know how to code, it's really easy to transfer the knowledge from one programming language to another, and it's not really that hard to learn about Java. I think like go back to learning what I mentioned before, having a purpose. Like don't don't worry about learning Java. Just worry about, hey, let's say I'm reading my code. Let's say if you're looking at my video and I have like there's like one line of code you don't understand, just Google that part and then just continue reading. It's like learning English. You won't just like learn English by looking at this dictionary. You'll probably learn English by reading books. And then if there's a word or phrase you don't understand, you just Google it, right? So it's kind of like that. Like have a purpose about learning. So don't take this as like a big giant task that you have to do. So
Yeah.
just always look at my implementation, my solution, some hard questions on Leetcode, some medium questions on Leetcode. I try to break it down and try to solve it. Yeah, that's kind of like something that you can look at and learn. You can solve it. You can in any language you like. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I used to get bogged down with the languages, and then somebody said something to me like a long time ago that, you know, like you should be able to express your solution either in comments or pseudocode, and then you're just using language of your choice to execute the solution that you already came up with, like in your mind, because you already know like how to implement it or how it works. So language is just how you're executing it, but like literally the solution, the process, it's language agnostic. So if you are comfortable, let's say with JavaScript, just use JavaScript, but you could still watch Eric's videos and get like, you know, the most important parts out of it, even though you're not familiar with Java. And like you said, you could always Google the stuff that you're not clear about. But with that being said, because, again, I want to be mindful of Eric's time, I want to first of all say huge thank you to you to coming on, because like I get really excited when I get people who love code and talk about code, because to me, I get just as excited talking about it too. And to me, I want to promote this idea that there's no secret formula. There's just doing the work and prioritizing the right tasks that get you closer to your goal. And in my mind, it's not watching videos of people showing their desks and drone footage and saying how cool their like whatever job is, because it's like somebody asked me like, Paul, show me your desk. And I'm like, why? Like, it's not going to help you get hired. Like, what is it going to do for you? Oh, look, I have a computer screen here. Great. Like with a cactus next to it that looks perfect because I have a set. Like, no, nobody cares. Like, I mean, people, like, if you care about it, your priority is wrong. Like, you know what I mean? At least that's my opinion. But any closing thoughts, Eric? I'm going to like leave it up to you.
Closing thoughts. I don't have any. Do you have any comments or questions from the chat I can answer? Or let's
Unless
see
someone
here.
wants to ask the last minute questions, we did have a question about, there's a bunch of different certifications, and someone asked about like, actually, Adrisa asked about A plus and Network plus, because it's part of her curriculum that she's learning in school. And what I would say, if it's part of a curriculum and you have no choice, those are the basics you need. Like it's fine, but to go out of your way as a self-taught developer to do those, like I don't think they're important, especially if you're not going to IT, you're going to development or software engineering. That was one question. Another question, actually, this is a good one. I'm sorry, Jerison, if you're not here, if I missed it, but this will be a great question for you too. Should we still apply to to jobs if they require 2+ years of experience and a long list of tech stack? jobs positions have heavy requirements and they even require a few years of experience. Like, should you let that stop you from applying?
It stopped me before, but I don't think it should stop you. I think basically at the first I applied to many jobs that have 2 years or maybe 5 years experience above, and I still apply them. You never know, right? You never know if there's like a different relative experience or relative job that are maybe similar to that. And what happened is that when you apply, the recruiters will actually be able to see it, and they look at your resume, and if there is a position that's similar to what you're doing, and actually be able to contact you to say, hey, I have a different position, something like that, right? So I think yeah, don't let us stop you. Sometimes as long as you get into that recruiter's eye, really the process will be a lot easier. Yeah.
Wow, that was like, I'm glad that didn't forget to ask that question, because what you said there apply anyway, because there might be another position, if it's not that particular position, that the recruiter might have in their mind that you will be a better fit. That's actually pretty amazing. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much. We do this live stream every Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern time. The Saturday stream is all about what steps you need to take to get hired, soft skill, building your network of recruiters, all this other great stuff. And then on Tuesday nights, I do a stream at 9 p.m., which is all about coding. Basically, I code live on my project that I'm working on. Fail probably most of the time, but the reason why I do it is because I want to show you the reality of coding on your own, that nobody does it perfect from the start. There's always issues that come up, and there's always refactoring that you will have to do afterwards, because a lot of people will get an idea that it's like someone sits down, spends 10 minutes, and it's done, and it's just not the case. And then when you're at home and you're having those problems, you're like, I must not be smart enough. No, it's just the reality of coding. It's not elegant and pretty. There's always something happens. And so with that being said, thank you, Eric, for your time. Thank you guys for the amazing time, and we'll see you guys on our next stream.